Welcome back to Debt Free Degrees. My name is Kate Wexell, and I'm the founder of the Compass College Consulting. Here at the Compass College Consulting, I'm dedicated to helping you find your perfect college and graduate debt free. Now, in the first 3 episodes or so, I have discussed with you a couple of the fundamentals to actually applying to college, including how to start off your school year strong, the exact timeline that you need for the college admissions process, and how to craft your personal statement. However, that's not necessarily what you're here for. You're here for what the title says, which is debt free degrees. And so today we're going to actually talk about why on earth is college so expensive? Because here's the thing, in 2024, students are spending an average of $108,000 to obtain a 4 year degree at an in state school. So we're not even talking about private universities, we're not even talking about out of state schools. That is just your typical state school that is costing you 6 figures. In addition, 75% of people in the US say that college is too expensive to afford, and there has been a 65% increase in average college tuition fees just between 2000 and 2021. So, if you're a student and your parents have told you about those good old days whenever they only needed to pay about $10,000 for their degree, or maybe they didn't set aside any money for you, or maybe they couldn't even do that, and now you're slammed with this huge bill, it's overwhelming. There is a reason why many people, especially in Gen Z, are starting to think that they should reconsider their options and maybe college isn't the best fit, and it's primarily because of this number. The cost of college is the number one deterrent from students actually attending school. And here's the thing, it is like this in the United States and in the United Kingdom. However, the cost of college in other countries is almost nothing. So, why is it so expensive, particularly in the US and in the UK? Well, in the United States, over time, the US has seen a consistent decline in state funding for higher education, which has led to increased tuition. So, between 2008 and 2018, public colleges in the US increased tuition by 37% to make up for budget cuts. So, really, what this can be attributed to is with the state governments reprioritizing where they were allocating their funding, this meant that colleges that were supposed to be funded by the government had to start funding themselves through just raising the fees. And so now let's imagine this. Say that you were a nonprofit and you received all of your money through grant funding. Well, now that grant funding has been taken away. How do you actually still make money when your goal is not to sell a product? Well, you have to sort of reorient your method of thinking and start thinking like a for profit company. So, what does this mean? In order to stay afloat, you have to start thinking of the ways to encourage people to actually still purchase your product that was initially supposed to be a public service. And so, how do you get a bunch of 18-year-olds to continue on doing the same studying and boring book reading, which I personally think is kind of fun, and still taking tests and exams and doing something that's really hard when they could just be off hanging out with their friends and living what they think is the good life, right? That means that you have to create some type of incentive. And so, one of the things that has caused this large inflation of prices within US colleges and universities is the fact that there is a huge expansion of administrative staff and that there are expensive facilities. So, how do you get 18-year-olds to go to college? Start creating massive recreational centers. Start including pools and water parks. Start creating different health centers and community centers and every single type of pristine building. Start creating better food. Start providing all of these amenities on campus so that it's essentially like you're paying for a school to provide your entire life for you. Just so those of you in the United States who are listeners, it is actually not like this in most other countries. For example, at universities in Germany, which are mostly free and paid for by the German government, students are going to school just to take their classes, and then they'll typically find apartments off campus, and they'll typically take care of their own dining. So the only thing that is actually provided is the fundamental education, and the rest of a student's life takes place off campus. Whereas in the United States, you go to school, and a lot of colleges will even require for you to live on campus for 1 to 2 years. And sometimes colleges might even require for you to live on campus for all 4 years. A lot of schools will also require for you to pay for a dining plan and to pay for additional fees such as health insurance. And what that does is it encompasses your whole living situation. And what that's also done is it's meant that administrative costs to help run all of those extra amenities have risen. Administrative costs have risen by 60% between 1993 and 2007, while faculty costs have only risen by 40%, according to the American Council on Education. The next thing that we're looking at is that when the government even tried to step in and help out by creating federal loan policies, this actually made institutions more expensive. So, the relationship between federal loan policies and rising college costs in the US can be explained by a concept called the Bennett hypothesis, named after William Bennett, former US Secretary of Education. He argued that the availability of federal student loans incentivizes college and universities to raise tuition. Here's how it works. So, first of all, there is an increased demand for higher education. When federal loans are available, they allow more students to afford college, which increases demand for higher education. So, that's good, right? But then this higher demand gives colleges the ability to raise prices, knowing that students can borrow to cover the cost. So, imagine in a messed up world where most people, nearly everybody, is given food stamps. Then, if all grocery stores know that most people are coming in with food stamps and they'll be able to obtain food for free or almost free, then why would they not have the incentive to raise prices? Then that means that when the government makes loans widely available and accessible, students can borrow without immediate financial constraints, giving universities less incentive to keep prices low. Now, the difference between the food stamps example that's thankfully not true and this is the fact that with food stamps, you're just given that money for free. Whereas with loans, you have a bunch of 18-year-olds taking on all of this debt that they don't have to think about in that moment and they can think about in 4 years, right? So you're more susceptible to be making that decision to take on a loan. The second thing is that there is reduced price sensitivity. So, with easy access to loans, students are less price sensitive because they don't feel that immediate financial burden. And so, this allows institutions to raise tuition without a significant drop in enrollment. And then it also creates sort of like a cushion with your loans because since students can borrow to pay for their education, universities may feel less pressured to cut administrative costs, spend more prudently on facilities, or limit their tuition increases. And so then the impact of loans is that while they were designed to make college accessible, they created conditions that allow colleges to increase prices without restraint. And so the availability of loans encourages higher tuition, fuels administrative bloat, and then it shifts the burden of cost onto students, contributing to the $1.7 trillion of student loan debt in the United States. And so now let's move over to the United Kingdom. If you are a UK resident and you listen to the US portion of this segment, then great, fantastic. You've probably seen tons about student loan debt in US news. Now, if you're a US listener, let's learn just a little bit about the United Kingdom. So, pretty much prior to 1998, UK higher education was mostly free as it is in the majority of Europe. But then since then, fees have increased steadily. Now, it should be noted that UK tuition prices are absolutely nowhere close to the price of US educations. In the UK in 2024, students pay up to about 10,000-ish pounds annually for undergraduate programs, and it's actually slightly under that, according to the UK Department for Education. However, what has happened is kind of similar to the US. Government funding per student has fallen in real terms, increasing the financial burden on universities. In the 2020s, the government funding dropped by 12% in real terms. And so, what that means is that UK universities have also had to rely on a similar system to the US, where you have to create an incentive in your pricing model. Now, in the UK, it's a little bit different because of the close proximity to other countries. So, UK universities rely mostly on international students who pay significantly higher tuition. Now, what this means is that international students are paying pretty similar costs to how much US students have to pay. So that means that international students are paying about 20 to 30,000 pounds per year for tuition in the UK. So now, is there actually any end in sight, or will we continue to see this type of inflation with the cost of college? Well, there are a couple of solutions that could happen. So, in the US, we could have increased government funding. One of the primary reasons for the rise in tuition in public colleges is the reduction in state funding. So, if the federal and state governments reverse this trend and provided more funding to universities, they could lower tuition. However, this would really need to rely on increased public investment in education that could reduce the need for institutions to rely on tuition and creating 500 new football stadiums to cover operating expenses. However, this would also require a lot of tax reforms and really taking a hard look at where we could pull that money from the federal budget. The other thing is that similarly, some politicians, such as Bernie Sanders, have advocated and pushed for tuition free college, particularly at public universities. Now, it should be noted that at a lot of community colleges, tuition is already free for local residents or people who fit certain qualifications. I know when I was in high school, I was offered, since I was in the top 20% of my grade, that I could have attended community college for free for 2 years right down the street from where I grew up. However, just like the previous solution with increased government funding, this would also require increased taxes or reallocation of government spending. Now, in the UK, they could cap or reduce tuition fees for domestic students. Scottish universities, for example, already offer free education to Scottish residents, which could be extended to the rest of the UK. The next thing that could happen is that we could go through student loan reform. So, in the US, federal student loans play a key role in rising college costs, as I talked about earlier. So, reforming the system to make loans less easy to obtain or tying loans to lower tuition costs could pressure institutions to keep tuition prices in check. So, what that would mean is that we would need to introduce policies that limit loan amounts or link federal financial aid to tuition restraint. However, this would mean that college might be less accessible for low and middle income students unless there are other forms of financial aid, like grants, that are expanded. But the primary thing that could happen right now is just that US and UK universities could stop focus on creating these magnificent facilities and could instead think about cost control, such as reducing the administrative bloat, cutting unnecessary expenditures on facilities that don't really contribute to education, and really thinking about what is actually necessary to fulfill the mission of helping people obtain a college degree. What's more worth it? Being able to sit in a water park inside of your university, or being able to actually buy a house or a car or afford having kids 10 years down the road because you don't have six figures of debt. Now, there is a silver lining, and that's the fact that apart from the United States, there is actually a lot of countries in the world that don't have such extreme costs to attend college. So, in other countries, there are a lot of government subsidies that are provided. So many countries treat higher education as a public good, and so they will subsidize tuition as a social investment model. So, for example, in Germany, as I mentioned earlier, public universities are tuition free for both domestic and international students. And so 27% of higher education funding in Germany comes from student fees, compared to 65% in the United States. A lot of these schools will also focus on efficiency by having a low administrative overhead. So, for example, in Scandinavian countries, their schools keep low administrative costs by focusing on funding teaching and research, and they don't focus on funding anything else. Everything else is extra. Also, most European countries offer 3-year undergraduate programs, which means that you are saving a whole lot of money on that overall cost for that fourth year. And then there's a limited reliance on, so countries like France and Germany have minimal reliance on student loans and they focus more on grants and subsidies. So in France, for example, less than 10% of students rely on loans compared to 70% in the United States. So Let's go through a couple of countries that, if you're really worried about costs in the US or the UK, you could think about attending instead. So, in Germany, as I said, it does not cost anything for domestic and international students. Most students are only paying for their living expenses, which averages about 850 euros per month. In Norway, it's also similar. Norway has a free education for all students, including non EU international students, but the cost of living is slightly higher at about 1,200 euros per month. In France, public universities charge between 170 and 600 euros per year for undergraduate programs, and it's about 1,000 euros per month to live in major cities. In Sweden, school is free for EU and EEA citizens, and then international students will pay maybe up to about 10,000 euros, and it will cost about 850 to 1,100 euros per month to live. And then Finland is the exact same. And so I personally feel very passionately about helping people be able to attend college for less money or for free. So this is just the beginning of me teaching you about how to attend school for less money. As I mentioned briefly in the very first podcast episode, I was able to graduate school in only 2 years with no debt from a 4 year US university. So, in future episodes, I'll be helping you learn more about scholarships, different types of financial aid, how to apply for government loans, and how to completely find some loopholes in the system to work around all of that and not even have to worry about any of those components. Anyway, thank you for listening. There is a new podcast episode out every single Monday. I also have YouTube videos that come out every Tuesday talking about some slightly different topics. And then if you're interested in checking out any of my other work, my handle is thecompass.online on most other platforms. And that also happens to be the name of my website, where you can schedule essay editing, one-on-one coaching, and on-call messaging to help you through the college admissions process. Thank you, and I'll see you next week.